Hey everybody, welcome to React Wednesdays. My name is TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate at Blues Wireless. With me, special guest host today, Paige Niedringhaus. Paige, how's it going?
It's going good, TJ. Thanks for having me on. Hey,
Do you want to
everybody.
do you want to tell people that don't know you, you are a previous guest of and a previous host of React Wednesdays, but for those that don't know you, you want to tell them who you are, what you do, that sort of thing?
Sure. So I am Paige Niedringhaus, as TJ said. I actually work with him at Blues Wireless. I am a staff front-end engineer there. So we don't quite work on the same things, but we get to work for the same company, which is really fun.
Indeed. And for people that are completely new here, this is React Wednesdays. It, as the name implies, is a stream that we do every Wednesday here on Twitch. We upload to YouTube afterwards. So if you are watching this on YouTube, hi, and maybe consider joining our live streams as well. We do them Wednesday, 1 o'clock US Eastern time. And I'm going to drop a link to the site's website here in chat. So if you want to check that out, we put our schedule up, upcoming guests, all those sorts of things that you can check those out as well. Today, we have a very special guest. I want to welcome to React Wednesdays, Kent C. Dodds. Kent, how's it going, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fine. For people that don't know you, who are you? What do you do? All those sorts of things.
Yeah. So my name is Kent. I live in Utah with my family, 4 kids and a dog and my wife, and my collection of stuffed koalas. And I do JavaScript stuff. So I've been doing this for, I graduated from college in 2014. So set on 7 years now. And well, I guess I did a little bit before that. But yeah, I work at Remix, the co-founder of Remix. I am the director of developer experience. And so if you don't have a good experience with Remix, it's my fault and, and my job to make that better. Before that, I was a full-time teacher. I built epicreact.dev. That's still going strong and still really useful. I still recommend it to people who want to learn React. So go check out epicreact.dev if you haven't already. Love to hear some shout outs in the chat from anybody who has taken Epic React, because that always makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. Testingjavascript.com as well is another one of my courses that I've made, self-paced workshop sort of thing, that is still also very relevant and useful for folks. But right now I am 100% focused on Remix. For the last maybe 6 years or so, I've been focused on trying to help people make the world better with quality software. And I do that best by teaching people how to write quality software. And so when Remix came out about a year ago, when it was released as beta or a developer preview just over a year ago, I started thinking, oh my gosh, like this is the best way that I can accomplish my mission, is I just teach people how to build Remix sites and they will naturally build higher quality web applications. So I kind of shifted everything over to, I just want to teach Remix. And so that's why I joined the company, was because I felt like I could do that even better by being a part of the company. So anyway, that's who I am.
Well, first of all, it's very awesome. I am curious, is the koala just a favorite animal of yours? Because you recently did a website redesign as well, where a koala is a major factor in that as well. So I'm just curious, is there a backstory to that, or are you just a really big fan of koalas?
Yeah, so it's funny. A couple of years ago, I was making an open source project, and I thought, like, I need to have a mascot for this, so I just chose a random animal. I don't even remember which was the first one, but then I started choosing random emoji for my open source projects. People familiar with React testing library will recognize the goat. There's the octopus for DOM testing library, the tiger for Cypress testing library. So actually, I think even before that, I was working on a workshop, and I was writing a bunch of instructions of, like, here's both what you need to do and here's why you need to do it, and here's like some references to material. And when I was looking at it, I was like, that's just a bunch of text. If I'm just trying to go through this thing, how do I know, like, at what point do I actually need to do something? Because I might skip over an important part of this workshop or tutorial or whatever. And so I created Terry the Tiger. And so I had a little tiger emoji that I would put all over the place. And so I started doing that for my workshops. And at some point, I don't know exactly why, but I switched to a koala, and I made Cody the Koala. And that stuck. So Cody the Koala, anybody who's gone through Epic React or any of my workshops will recognize Cody the Koala. I actually have two. This is one you can buy for yourself, and it has the Epic React logo on the shirt. Super cute. I got one for everybody in my family. We each have our own. But this is the original Cody, and you can't get this. I got this on Amazon, and I was like one of the last ones to get this specific one. So this is Cody, and I will bring Cody with me to conferences and stuff now. So run me down, and I'll introduce you to Cody the Koala.
I do think it's a nice little like subtle teaching tip, though. Like it's just a way of like, I have a wall of text and I need to make it more interesting. Well, why not have a tiger or an elephant or a octopus or a koala, right? Because it's just how do you make it interesting to people and stand out?
Yeah,
it's
exactly. Well, and now we have like a whole team of emoji that on my workshops, I say like, here's Cody the Koala, Hannah the 100, Marty the money bag, Peter the project manager, Barry the bomb, Alfred the alert, like all of these different emoji that are like for Dominic the document, for specific things that that you'll find throughout the exercises and stuff, just to like catch your eye and be like, oh, that's a documentation link, and you don't even have to like parse anything beyond just the emoji.
Nice. So Kent, I have to ask, because I've been following Remix kind of in the news, but I really haven't used it yet. How would you describe Remix in terms of how it's different or how it's similar to React, since that's one of the languages that are the frameworks that I work with most frequently?
Yeah, sure. So Remix is like your framework, and React is your Vue library. And so we actually use React in Remix. In the future, we plan on supporting other Vue libraries, but React is like the obvious choice. It's more popular than every other option all put together. So like, or widely used. So yeah, and I personally really like React. So Remix adds a lot of things that applications need that you're not going to get from just React. So I'll dive into this in a lot more detail later, but things like wiring up your forms for mutations, wiring up your like fetch requests with the use effect and state and all of that stuff. A lot of that is complicated because we don't have a really great connection between our back end and our front end. And Remix makes that seamless so that it makes things just a lot more simple from the React standpoint. And so you end up, you're absolutely using React, and you still use effect for certain things or whatever, but most of the time you're just writing out JSX and you're using a couple hooks from Remix. And then Remix is your server for making that server client interaction really nice.
So would you say that it's kind of like Next.js, where Next.js has the API fetching capabilities and the server side rendering and static site generation and all of that? It's a little bit more in that vein?
Yeah, it's more in that vein. We have a project that like in the next week or so, we're going to give the final answer to the question, how is Remix different from Next? Because that's like the number one question that everybody asks.
We actually just got it in chat too.
So that's a super common question. It is wildly different. And the biggest thing that differentiates Remix from Next is the automatic user experience that you get when you're using Remix. And we'll talk about that more when I'm going through kind of what I've prepared here. But the Remix is just so focused on the user experience that when you're building a Remix app, your user experience is just naturally better. Like the default way to use Remix creates a naturally better user experience.
maybe that's a decent segue. If you want me, I can bring up your screen and maybe
Sure.
you just start walking through what Remix is, and we can use that to guide what we chat about a bit.
Yeah, I'm just gonna stand up here really quick.
Oh man, do you have the
Yeah.
standing desk?
No, we're serious. Actually, I just realized that today I put on the "You Can Sit With Us" shirt, and I just stood up. So I don't know what that says, but okay, great. So this is here, let me bump that up just a little bit. This is remix.run. You can go look at this right now, and this basically serves as my slides for anytime I'm telling people about Remix, because this site that Ryan built, this homepage is just really great. But yeah, right up front, we are focused on web fundamentals, modern UX, to enable you to build better websites. And like on my website, my whole goal is to help people make the world a better place through quality software. And so like I aligned really well with Remix. And so when Remix was brought so much focus to this, to building better websites, that was like, oh, this is like basically what I want to do, make higher quality software. And so this is a little bit of code that's like an example of a route, but we'll look into that a little bit more. I want to focus more on what you get from using Remix, or what your users get from using Remix, and then we can talk about the code. The code is, I'll tell you that the developer experience is better than anything you've used. It is phenomenal, but that's secondary to the user experience, and that's what I want to focus on. Probably the first biggest differentiator, we don't have to read all this text, don't bother reading all the text. The biggest differentiator between Remix and what a lot of people have been using in the last 6 years is that we don't do static builds. So we're not doing SSG. We want to break through the static, because distributed web infrastructure has gotten really awesome. And so now you can, for pennies on the dollar, deploy your app to regions all over the world through Cloudflare workers. My site is hosted on fly.io, and it's fast everywhere in the world. I've deployed this app all over the world so that no matter where you are, it's super fast, really close to where you are, including the data. And because of that, you can make really, really fast user experiences, sometimes even faster than static site generation, and have it be dynamic. So let's talk about why. I'm going to skip this part. We'll get back to that. Let's talk about why server-side rendering with Remix, it provides a better user experience than static site generation with whatever else you want to use. So we'll back up just a little bit and do a little bit of a history lesson. So years ago, and some people still live in this reality, but like the popular thing to do before static site generation was rendering on the server, and you wouldn't use a front end framework for that. You'd use like JSPs or something, .NET or something like that, or what was it called? Oh shoot, now I've forgotten what it was called. There was this really, really weird Java framework that I was using when I was at USAA that they wanted us to use, and
Struts.
No, it was way weirder than that.
Swing.
Really weird Java frameworks, man, would be good.
It was super, super weird. And we were migrating from our own custom built thing to this thing that was like already 10 years old, which I guess for a bank is what they want. I don't know. It was just super, super weird. But yeah, so that's the way that some people still build their websites that way. That's the way that we used to. That was how you did it. Your server would generate some HTML and send a response. So you get the request, you know who it was, you have all the data and everything, generate the response that's specific to them, send it back. And then you'd have a form, you'd put a form in there, and they would do a post to your thing with the form data, and you could do mutations that way. And that's just how it worked. The problem with that is, while you're waiting for that document request to happen, the user's not seeing anything. It's not a great user experience. The other problem with that is every single time you do a post, you end up with a full page refresh, and you have to re-download everything. It's not normally a big deal because you can cache lots of those static assets in the browser, but still, it's like you lose your focus. Like if you wanted to do a to-do app where you say, okay, add, check, like a full page refresh for all of that is not awesome. So we have Ajax, and now we can do JavaScript in the browser. And now all of a sudden, why don't we just do the entire thing in the browser? And so we just sent more and more to the browser. And we realized that, hey, why don't we actually put our HTML in the browser and then have the JavaScript just go get everything that we need, get all the data. And so what the benefit of that was that rather than just having a blank white screen, we could show this loading spinner. And so just to say like, hey, user, I see you. And like, it's more than just the little spinner you'll get in the favicon, right? So we saw that as kind of a better user experience. That's what like really bought me and brought me along to client-side rendering and stuff. It's like, oh, well, I can show them something useful sooner. And part of the reason for this was because like some of our users either have a really slow internet connection or they're all the way on the other side of the world from our origin server. And so that worked out. And then static site generation became a cool thing, because then if your page was the same for every user, then rather than just like an empty HTML document with a loading spinner in place, you could actually give the user like the finished content or what they were going to see. And so that worked out pretty well. And that's actually, let's see, old kentcdodds. It's kentcdodds.com, old.netlify.app. There we go. So this is not my old app. Hold on a second. I can't remember if it was old or... I don't know. Well, I do have my old website somewhere. That's weird. I don't know what this is all about. Yeah, because normally it's just like right there. Anyway, my old site did that. It was with Gatsby. I want to show you that because like there's something important on there. But one of the things on my old website is I had this workshops page, and I have the list of currently scheduled workshops. And so I wanted to show you, like, because these are all on Tito. And you can, well, that one's not on Tito. This one's on Tito. Hey, actually, this is a good example because that's what they're doing. They have a loading spinner in place here because they want to go see, do we have tickets available? So that's what I was doing on my website. This is not a great user experience, right? It'd be much better if you just landed on this page and they were just right there, right? So that was what I started facing when I added the workshops page to my website. Was I wanted to hit the Tito API to display whether I had workshops, like active workshops, right there. And so what I ended up doing was, because it was statically generated, like you have a couple options with static site generation. You could either rebuild your entire website anytime somebody bought a ticket, or you could just fetch it on the client. That's what, and no shade at these folks. Like this is a very normal way to build a website these days. Or you can just request it on the client. I didn't think that was a great user experience. I didn't like that. And so when Remix came around and said, hey, we can give you that experience without the loading spinner, and it's crazy fast. Look, I hit refresh, and that's like 250 milliseconds is what I'm getting for most of my responses. And I've been able to distribute this all over the world. So that's how fast it is no matter where you are in the world. That's cool. So anytime you have anything that's dynamic, well, let me take a step back. Static site generation works really well for people who are just dealing with static content and it doesn't change very often and it's just always that way. And so that's the box. And so if that's the box that you fit into, you're golden. Things are awesome. But as soon as you want to do anything outside of that box, then you force yourself to create a less awesome user experience. But again, like the whole reason we did this was so we could show something to the user while they're waiting for the app to load. Well, what if we could make it so that it doesn't take so long for the app to load? Then, like, maybe we don't need to show something to the user. Like, maybe it's okay that the site loads in less than a second. And we don't need to show the user some loading spinner if the site's only can take a second to load in the first place. Like, yeah, I don't see any reason to do that.
By the way, Kent, chat found your old site. I don't know what sort of detectives we have watching this, but
that's right. Yeah, I put a .com in here, but it's just Kent C. Dodds old. Yeah, so there it is, and you can look at the workshops, and if you look really quickly, you'll see a loading workshop details right there.
Mm-hmm. It's funny too because you mentioned like if only static is your thing and that's your box. I think in my experience, that box has gotten pretty small nowadays, because I
Yes.
think like almost nothing is just content anymore, because if you have content, chances are you have some social thing or some like comment thing that comes in, or some dynamic part that's sitting up top, or some ads or something. And like, I think there are very few people or very few sites I know of that it's like just straight content. And then as soon as you have something dynamic, you have this problem, and you need some way of addressing it, one way, or good or bad, or some sort of trade-offs that come into play.
Yes, exactly. And my original site before that old site, it was just static. And this was before Gatsby. I did my own little node script that I would run to compile my React to HTML. And I would just put that up on the server. There was no client-side code at all. People can feel free to look on the Wayback Machine to see what that looked like. It was a joke. But yeah, so that, like you said, the box is really small. And so once you need to branch out of that box, you give your users a not so great user experience. So we've all experienced this before, like on basically your banking website probably has this problem. Like Chase is really bad with this. I want to show you, but like then I'm showing you my banking stuff. So I just feel like that's weird. Your power company probably also has this problem. Your city, like lots of these older, lower budget maybe websites really have this problem. And so we've all experienced this, and this is what it looks like. We say, well, first we're going to go get that document. So for a short time, we'll just have the white screen. But because we put our index.html on CDN, then we should get this response fast, and we'll show the user a spinner. And now we're going to get the JavaScript that needs to be rendered for this home page. And that JavaScript is going to say, oh, okay, now I can go get the user because I'm Jamstack. And so my JavaScript goes to get the user. And that user, the root also knows that, hey, I rendered this left screen and they happen to be on this particular route. Since I am rendering the router now, I can render this side of the screen. So I need to go get the code for that because we're code splitting because we want things to be fast and we don't want everything in one big bundle. And so now we're going to go we've got the user, we're waiting for sales. Now sales is rendered and sales is like, hey, you happen to be on the invoices part of the sale. So let me go get that component and that data. And now like we keep on going. And this is the experience that it looks like. Bound, like bouncing all over the place. This is not good. And this is how we all build our websites now. Not great. Compare that to what we can do when we're server rendering, and we can send the entire thing as soon as that document comes up. And here we're being a little conservative here because with modern tech stacks, you can actually shrink this document request a lot. And we're experimenting with some stuff to make this even faster, where it basically hydrates instantly. As soon as the document is done, we hydrate. I'm not supposed to talk about things we haven't shipped yet, but that's what we're working on right now. It's really, really cool. That should be like by the end of this month, we'll have something like that. So in any case, what's really awesome is because another quality of Remix is that your entire application should work without JavaScript. And that's not cool because people run around with JavaScript disabled, which they do. Some people do. Like 2% of users don't have JavaScript enabled. What? And also, like lots of users still are using browsers that like are not modern browsers. Your Remix app will still work for those users too. So like we have support for IE6 with Remix because of that quality. So not only like the fact is that all of these links on the page, they are like Remix link components, but they're rendering anchor tags. And so even before the JavaScript finishes loading, I can actually start navigating around and using the site. And on top of that, if I had like a trash icon to delete this invoice or something, in Remix, that's a form. And so that will work. Remix understands how the browser does forms. Like the funny thing for anybody who's gotten into web dev in the last 6 years, the way that you learn to do mutations is you make a form, you have an on-submit handler, and the first thing your on-submit handler does is say event.prevent default. And then the next 30 lines are basically doing what event prevent default prevented. So you're like, hey, browser, don't do your thing. I'm going to do it for you. So what Remix says is, hey, browser, do your thing. And then we can progressively enhance it by adding JavaScript so that we're not doing full page refreshes. But the cool thing is that you don't have to wait for the JavaScript to finish loading before the user can start using the app. That has a lot of really awesome implications, only one of which is just the performance aspects here. So it ends up being a lot more usable, more accessible, all of those things. So yeah, with Remix, you wind up with a better user experience because you're not bouncing around all over the place, and the user actually can start using the app right away. I think that is really awesome. The other cool thing that I'll probably mention a little bit later too is because of Remix embraces what the browser does. So much of your code ends up on the server rather than on the client. And so you end up sending less JavaScript to the browser as well. And so not only does the app work before the JavaScript loads, but it also takes less time for the JavaScript to load because there's less of it. So this is a lot of really great qualities. And this is all made possible so like that particular aspect of it is awesome on its own, but you combine this with modern infrastructure and like distributed deployments, distributed data, and now all of a sudden your app is screaming fast, sometimes even faster than SSG, with a really awesome user and developer experience. So I got like a bunch more things to say, but I've just been talking for a while, so I'm gonna pause for a sec. I'm gonna get a drink. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, no, it's we did have one question from chat that came in about how about time to first byte is a little slow on Remix, and I'm also curious about that too, because it seems like the model would be, so if a truly static site generated thing, I'm going out to a server, I'm getting like an HTML file, it comes down is like my very first thing. With Remix, right, if I'm understanding this correctly, I'm hitting a server first, right, that's going to still return me some HTML. So the only delay would be like that, like time, the processing it has to do to like basically inject some of these things, like maybe my user data or whatever. Am I more or less understanding that correct?
Yeah. So that's a big thing that people talk about. This is like the biggest focus of frameworks like Next.js. They're always talking about TTI or TTFI, time to first byte. So I have a couple of things to say about that. First of all, TTFI is a key indicator of performance, but it is not performance. Those two things are different. So like I may be able to show something useless to my users sooner, but it's useless. So like, okay, great. But then the other thing is what I'm more interested in is time to interactive. Like how fast can I actually start interacting with the website? That's the user experience. That's what we're looking for. The user doesn't care about the bytes. They care about the usability. Like, can I use this thing? So when is this interactive? The other cool thing about this is actually I should just have this ready and to demo to people. But we've got some examples of Cloudflare workers responding with a fully server rendered app with user specific data in 20 milliseconds.
Wow.
So like, okay,
that's too fast.
It's like crazy. And we also are experimenting with Dino, because Dino is like Node except crazy faster, and hosted on Fly, just in a Docker container. Yeah, like sub 50 milliseconds on that. So I mean, you start adding a lot of user data and stuff, and that maybe increases, but you add some smart caching in place there, and now it's basically like you're adding 5 milliseconds to that request. So like when you get down to less than 100 milliseconds, I don't think time to first byte matters all that much. You're way more interested in time to interactive, and you're not going to beat Remix with that. So.
It's funny. We had another good comment in chat. As a newbie, I just don't understand how it's possible to deliver content under half a second. I would say, as I've been doing this for a while, and I don't totally understand how it's possible to deliver, like especially talking like 20 milliseconds. Like, man, that's just nuts to me, because just like the sheer latency, like you think like the speed of light starts to get involved in terms of like the packet just sending packets over the wire at that point. So that's kind of nuts.
Yeah, I know. This is what happens when you have a distributed infrastructure that has like hundreds of nodes all over the world, and you're basically like down the street from the closest one, right? Like I think I need to look up the stats, but like Cloudflare in particular has like 80% of the world's population within I don't know, it's like 50 miles or something like that of one of their nodes. Like it's crazy. So yeah, distributed infrastructure has gotten really good. And Cloudflare is not the only one. Fastly's got their thing. AWS has their Lambda and Edge stuff. So this edge computing stuff is awesome. Fly.io, where I'm hosting my site, they don't have as many regions, but I get like a full node server. And I have like Postgres running in all of those regions too. So like it doesn't actually, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good to deploy. Well, it does you quite a bit of good, but it's really important to deploy not only your rendering, but also your data to that edge so that you can get those really, really fast response times. And that's a big thing with Remix. Now, like you can do Remix on a regular old, like pick a region, you know, we deployed a Vercel and we deployed a Netlify, you pick a region and serverless and whatever, like that still totally works and you'll still end up with what I think is a better user experience. Well, I said what I think. I really think it's objective. Like it is a better user experience to not have a spinner bouncing around all over the place, and to be able to start using the app as soon as that document comes back. But yeah, anyway, those are the trade-offs that we're talking about. Is like implement the right level of caching for any of your data if needed. Like you got a slow service or something, and you can make your site outrageously fast for users, and that user experience just way better. So yeah, let's another thing that we do is we can detect as the user's using your app where they're going to navigate. And so we're using the browser standard for link prefetches to prefetch your data, your assets, your like your CSS, your JavaScript, everything. So by the time the user actually navigates, it feels like all of that code was already there and available because it was. We put it into the browser cache. This has a lot of really awesome implications as well, where like it's not just like everybody's doing like prefetching of JavaScript, you know, lazy loading, code splitting, all that stuff. But prefetching of the data, now that's really interesting. And prefetching it in a way that sticks it into the browser cache rather than some in-memory cache. That's also very interesting because it means that if I like hover over here and say, hey, I'm thinking about going to this page, and then say, oh, never mind, I'm going to hit refresh, and then I'm going to navigate over there. Well, I already prefetched it. It's in the browser's cache. So you can refresh, and that browser cache still hangs on to that. You also don't need to worry about garbage collection, which anybody who's written a in-memory cache runs into that problem as soon as they open source their library. So we rely very heavily on the browser standards that have been around for years and years and years. So yeah, you don't really think about data caching or data loading. It's all like managed for you within the framework in a way that works whether JavaScript is enabled or not, which is really cool, or before JavaScript is loaded or not. Let's talk about mutations here really quick. We skipped over nested routing a little earlier, and I still kind of want to get to that, but I realize we are a little limited on time. So maybe we'll get back to that. But let's talk about mutations. Most frameworks will come to you and be like, here's how you load data. Mutations? I don't know. Go use a library for that. And in fact, some frameworks don't even talk about how to load data. With Remix, we feel like both loading data and mutating it are like core parts of what makes a website like a web app, like a real thing that people can use on the web. And so it's a core part of what Remix does. So first of all, Remix understands what a form submission is. The browser automatically can serialize your form and make a request somewhere, and Remix understands that request, and you can handle that with your action code is what that function is called. But then we can enhance it with JavaScript, which is why we have this uppercase form component. And so this will just render to a regular form. And then when JavaScript loads, the app hydrates, now this form will actually do a prevent default so that you don't end up with a full page refresh. And it will just simulate what the browser would have done with a fetch request. And so on your backend, what in the same file as where that form appears. So within the route module, you say, here's my backend code for handling when this form is submitted. And the first question people always ask is like, what if I have more than one form on a particular route? You can totally do that. Like we've been disambiguating forms since like PHP days. That's an easy one. You put a name and a value on your submit button, and now you can disambiguate which form was submitted. So like, I love your questions. I know you were going to ask that. There it is. That's the answer. So here we've got our action code where we say, hey, I've got this request. Now, what is this request? If you want to know a lot of things about Remix, you go to MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, where they document the web platform, because so much of what you do with Remix is using MDN. So this request, this is a web API for the request object. You can say new request in your browser console right now. That's what this is. So that's really cool, because then you've got this form data function, and if you're like, whoa, what can I do? Like, can I pass an argument here? You don't go to the Remix docs. You go to MDN. So we say, like, the better you get at Remix, the better you get at web dev, because you're using so many of these web dev features. So that's really cool. So we're going to get our request. We can talk to our database directly, or we can hit our backend APIs, whatever you would normally do inside of your on-submit handler. You can do in here. Oh yeah, and also you can actually talk to your database directly and not worry about private keys or anything like that, because this actually does run on a server. And then you can redirect the user to where they need to be, or just say, hey, they stay where they are, whatever. So that's really awesome, because now you have the code that's making the request and the code that's handling the request right in there. If you wanted to do some validation, you could literally make a validation function up here and call it in both places. And so now you need to do the validation on the server, period. Like, you've got to do that. But you could take that same code and use it in both places seamlessly without even really thinking about it, which I think is also quite cool. And another thing that Remix manages for you is, as soon as a post request is successful, it immediately makes a get request for all of the data that's on the page. Because, like, you made a mutation, who knows what changed? Let's just go get it all. And there's a way to, like, opt out of specific things. You're like, oh, I know that this wouldn't have changed. So you can, like, opt out of that if you want to. That's like a optimization that most people will never need, but you can do it. But what's really cool is, like, what if you've got a bunch of to-dos that you check. If the user does that and we have a race condition in that situation, then you could wind up with some stale data where, like, the first request went, the second request went, that one came back, and then the first request came back. Like, now you're in a bad situation. So Remix automatically takes care of those race conditions for you, where if the user says, hey, I actually want to make another mutation before that other get request comes back, then it cancels those get requests and it gets you the latest. So you never really need to worry about the stale data either. So, like, again, you don't think about the client-side cache or data invalidation or anything like that. It's all Remix just manages that for you, which is pretty sick. And then we can do some really cool things with loading states, when we create this. But even better, you can make optimistic UI in a really nice way, because Remix gives us this use transition hook that will tell you when a submission is going on. And if you're making an invoice, then maybe you want to send people to the invoice page. Well, you already have all the data for the invoice, right? Because they just gave it to you. And so here, that's all the form data right there that you can just send it onto the invoice component that you're rendering on the invoice page and make it look like the user's already on that new invoice page. And if there's a failure, then there's no longer a submission. The transition never actually happened, and you render that form again with all the errors and stuff. So optimistic UI, that awesome user experience that we can have, is just kind of a natural thing that falls out of the way that you build mutations with Remix. So, yeah.
Now, so a couple different questions. I know one I have right away is, we talked about code that runs on the server, code that runs on the client. Is that something that me as the author of this code, do I have to, like, tell Remix this is a client-side code, this is server-side code? Is Remix gonna, like, figure that out for me? Are there conventions around that? How does all that work?
Yeah. So Remix figures it out for you with your, if we go up to the very top, this is what a route module looks like. You have a bunch of different exports you can export, and some of those will be on both, some of those will only be on one or the other. And so, yeah, we have our loader that's just on the client or on the server. We have our action that's just on the server, and then our component is on both. And so Remix just kind of figures that out for you.
You alluded to this earlier, but like web dev has went through different eras where like we used to do everything on the server, then we're like, no, everything on the client. And now we're kind of like in this messy in between period where we kind of know some stuff works better in different places, but like trying to come up with conventions or frameworks like Remix to help like manage that and make it easier for your average person to deploy and use, I feel like.
Yeah. And it can be a little bit tricky. We've actually been struggling with this as a community generally since we started server rendering. But it's impossible to tell TypeScript that this particular file and this part of the file can run in like any number of JavaScript environments. Like this one runs in a Cloudflare worker and this part runs in a browser. Like the TypeScript doesn't figure that out. So hopefully that will get better. But most of the time, it's not really a problem. And it just ends up being a really awesome user experience where you can say, here's the code for submitting the form. Here's the code for handling that form submission. And that's awesome. That makes you really productive. And then like one thing that I didn't mention is for loading data, just like the action, you have this loader that you can talk to a database and everything. It runs on the back end. And what's cool about that is you can actually, if you're hitting an API that sends you way too much data, you can filter out that data before you send it to the client. And so, you know how like everybody's all over GraphQL because you can avoid data overfetching?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, GraphQL is still cool for other reasons, but not for that reason. Not because with Remix, you don't have that problem. That problem doesn't exist. So you can still use GraphQL with Remix, but you use it on the back end and you don't have to send that huge GraphQL client, which by the way, is way bigger than React DOM. So everybody's like, oh, React DOM is so big. GraphQL is enormous. It is so big. And you send that to the client and you're just like, that's just the way we build apps. No, you can build apps, but leave that on your server. And we'll just like give you something really nice and small for you, and you can filter it out in your loader code. I do this on my site. In fact, on the Chats podcast, each one of these podcast episodes, the data that I'm getting from Simplecast is they send so much data, and I have to call like 6 different endpoints to get all the data that I need for each of these episodes. And so I'm able to, I put all that in one file to manage that, hit all those endpoints and all this garbage. And I cache it so that it's fast because their API is not. And also I can get rate limited. And so, but then I can filter it down to just the stuff that I need for this particular page. In fact, like I have just the profile picture, the episode number, the title, the length of time, and then the like all the description and everything else, the guest, all of that stuff. Is for this other route. And so like I don't have to load all that stuff on every single page. I can just say for this route, this is the data that I need. I can filter it down to exactly what I need. And it's not like I need to look up in the API docs of how to do this. It's just the natural way that falls out when you have, here's my route, here's the loader, and here's the component that needs stuff. My component needs more stuff. Okay, I'll go like literally up in the same file and change my loader a little bit so I can get that stuff. And it's all type safe too. And you can do type assertions and stuff like that to make it type safe. Super cool.
So how does Remix work with something like WebSockets or real-time data? Does it work pretty well for that as well?
Yeah, so we don't have built-in support for WebSockets, but you can absolutely use WebSockets. During development, we are using WebSockets to give you a live reload and stuff like that. So yeah, WebSockets work as they always do. We don't have built-in support. We do have things that you can do to say, hey, go refresh data for this page. And we're going to, we have so many cool plans. So like I said, one of our core values is don't talk about stuff until we've actually shipped it because like, and I've already broken that a couple times. So my bad. But yeah, we have cool plans and that's as far as I'm going to go with that. So I do have one other thing, well, 2 things. I want to talk about error handling and I want to talk about nested layouts. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about nested layouts first. So this part, it helps with the user experience, but also it allows Remix to automatically make your user experience better. And then it makes it so your development experience is way better as well. So, and also the Konami code does not do anything on this page. I don't know. Ryan didn't do anything. I need to go and update it so that it does thing like a Tyrannosaurus Rex running across the bottom of the screen sounds appropriate. I don't know, something. But yeah, so here's just an example of a page. We've got example.com/sales/invoices/invoice ID. And so we've got our left nav, we've got the top nav, we've got sales data or invoices data here, and then specific invoices, and then data for that specific invoice. So most apps resemble this in some way, like twitter.com, you've got your left nav, you've got your thing up here, you've got your right nav stuff here, you've got these details, and like we see this everywhere. GitHub is also like this. And so often and actually I should have showed specifically, like we're on the home route, but we can go to a specific route. What is this? I don't know. But we can go like
Beat Saber. Have you not played Beat Saber before?
Yeah. Okay, I didn't read it clearly. I actually have never played Beat Saber before.
Oh, you should. It's
really fun.
Do you have a VR headset at all?
No. I've resisted.
You should try it. I'm not a big VR person, but it's, even if just for like gimmicky purposes, it's fun. Like you'll get, if nothing else, you'll get these like pop culture references. Like when somebody drops a Beat Saber tweet, you'll be in on it.
I'll understand. Oh yeah, the Lady Gaga thing is on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's very common. You have your routes. They map to some UI, and that UI is typically nested. In some way, shape, or form. It's not always. Like my blog, I have /blog, and then you go to a specific blog, and it's not nested inside of the blog route. So like you don't always have this sort of setup, but you do really often have these nested sorts of layouts. And so Remix embraces this not only in the way that it works internally, but also in the way that you use it, where each one of these routes is its own route module, and all that route module cares about is what it is responsible for. And so here for example.com, this is going to be our root route. So it takes care of rendering everything, getting the data for the whole shell of the app. Our root route is responsible for rendering this left nav. And then our sales route is responsible for rendering all of this stuff and the sales nav right there. So what's interesting here is that the code for the root route is going to render the nav on the left, and then what's called an outlet on the right. And so an outlet is a special component in React Router version 6 and in Remix that allows you to say, hey, I'm going to have children, and when those children appear, I want them to be rendered over here. So you're just like controlling where the children appear. And so that's actually quite cool, because our root route can say, this is what I care about. This is what matters to me. Here's the data that I'm going to get for what matters to me. And then I'm just going to render all my children in this outlet. Sales does the same thing. I'm responsible for rendering the sales nav, and then I'm going to render this outlet for any of my children. So whether they click on overview, subscriptions, invoices, customer deposits, I don't care really what it is. All I care about is that this is where that UI goes when they navigate to those things. Invoices does the same thing. I'm going to render all these invoices. I'm going to render the invoice list. So I have a data requirement to go get the list of invoices, but I don't need the details. I just need like the customer and the amount and the due date or the status or whatever. And so I can render all of that in this list here. And then I render an outlet here, which ultimately is going to get rendered by our invoice route. So each one of these is an individual file that just renders or it requires its own data and then renders that data for that part of the route that it cares about. And if it's going to have a child, it'll render an outlet to say where its children should go. This ends up being a really awesome developer experience, because you know exactly where to go to know what to change, and you don't need to worry about having like a layout route. The frameworks like Next and Gatsby, they have nested routes from a file standpoint, but if we had this sort of structure, you'd have your sales invoices with the invoice ID thing, and that invoice ID route would be responsible for rendering everything on the page. So everything that the user sees when they're on that page, which is why we have these layout routes. So you don't have that problem in here. And that means that Remix also can optimize the data loading So as the user's navigating around, they click on this one, then they click on that one. It knows that we don't need to reload the data for everything else on the page. We're just like changing which of these invoice IDs is loaded. So we just go and get the data for that particular thing that's now being loaded. So that's awesome from the user perspective, and also the developer perspective when you're building these layout routes or these nested routes. It's awesome. Okay, sweet. So last thing, I know that we're like 52 minutes and 30 seconds. So let me wrap up with this last thing. Sometimes errors happen, and it's not great for errors to happen. So how do we handle errors? One thing I love about Remix is that the error path or the happy path stays happy, and the error path can be like managed specifically. And so like it's intentionally thought about. So this is how you do this. This is our route module, and we just add this error boundary component as an export, and that's it. Now you've handled the errors. Any errors that happen. And what's cool about this is you may be familiar with an error boundary from React, but React error boundaries don't work on the server. So if there's you're rendering on the server and there's an error, you're calling foobar, or make me a sandwich function that doesn't exist, that is going to throw an error. You're going to get a 500 unless you handle it in a special way, even if you have an error boundary around that. So Remix simulates that same sort of API with its error boundary export. But it will make it work. It will make it work on the server render as well. So what's really cool about this is if you combine this with nested routing, then you have your route for the particular invoice and an error boundary for that. And Remix says, oh, sweet. So the rest of the app works. It's just this nested route that didn't work. So I can just render the error boundary in place of the component that didn't work, and everything else still works. So I can still navigate, and I can say to the support team, hey, the Stenconia the invoice has some bad data or something, and so it's blowing up. But like all these other invoices work fine. It's just this one. And now instead of like, hey, I've got a white screen, I don't know what's wrong, they can say, no, it's just this invoice. It has some bad data or something. So yeah, error. And errors bubble up as well. So you can put error boundaries at every level in your nested routing, and we'll just find the lowest one closest to where we were at to give the user the best experience possible. One thing that we don't mention on here is we also have this concept of catch boundaries for expected errors. So they're like the unexpected ones that is like thrown, syntax error. I don't know, like just those things that you're like, oh, whoops, I totally forgot about that or whatever. But then there's the expected stuff like, hey, you may have access to this particular invoice, but you don't have access to this one. That's a 401, or you have a 404, like that invoice doesn't exist or whatever. So these are expected errors. You can do the exact same sort of thing. But what's really cool about that is those errors will surface within your action or your loader. And with those, you can throw a response. And so like you're going along and you're like, sweet, things are good. You get to a point, you're like, oh, this user doesn't have access. I don't want the rest of this code to run. So you just throw a response that says, hey, this is a 404 response or a 401 or a 400 or whatever it is. And we will do basically the same thing here. And you have a special catch boundary, say, hey, you don't have access to this thing or whatever. So that means that abstractions are really easy to write, because we're throwing errors. So you can take that code, put it in a function, and you don't have to worry about, oh, do they have access? If they don't have access, then do an early return or whatever. Like that code can just throw the response, and the rest of the code just says, check that they have access, and then continue on the rest of the way. So abstractions for Remix are really quite easy to build for that reason. So there you go. That's my Remix spiel, and it's amazing. And I love it. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, no, this has been awesome. Man, I feel like we could take up a few more hours going over this, but I do want to respect people's time. I'm going to give a last call to chat. If you have any last questions for Kent, please get them in now, because we're going to wrap up here soon. And in the meantime, Kent, can you I'd like to end with just like give us like a link dump. Like, what's the best place to go to? Like, where's the best place to get started? Best place to follow for updates?
Do we need to still purchase a license, or is it open sourced?
No, you don't have to purchase a license anymore. I was an early adopter. So for those who are not familiar, Remix started as a pay for a license software. And I think they could have been successful that way, but we I guess decided to pivot to free, and we have other ways of making money in the works right now. And it's going to be sick. I actually can't wait for you all to see the ideas that we have. It's going to be so good. People are going to love this stuff. So the best way to keep up to date is go to twitter.com/remix_run and follow us on Twitter right now. Maybe you can get us to 30,000. That would be sweet. Go to GitHub and give us that star. Everybody loves the star. But we also have a Discord that is a really sweet place to hang out, which is not linked here, unfortunately. That's my bad. I'll put a link in the notes here or in the chat.
That's in the chat. I got the Twitter in there, so hit like. Got the GitHub in here. Let's boost their social stats here.
Yeah. But if you want to get started, so the Discord is actually a really good place to hang out and just like see what's going on. The docs are my responsibility, and so I like to think that they are pretty okay. And I would say that the best way to get started is this quick start, the developer blog. And so the developer blog, it should take you around like less than an hour to go through all of this, and it'll expose you to a lot of the things that you can do. And then if you're still interested after that, and hopefully you are, then take a look at the Jokes app, because actually I have a walkthrough. You can follow along with me. And it's like a workshop that we do together. It's pretty fun. But this includes like setting up a database and doing authentication and all of that stuff. Optimistic UI, all this really, really cool stuff, but like really, really big tutorial to really expose you to anything that you would need for a modern web application today. So yeah, pretty cool getting started stuff there. And yeah,
cool.
We have more things in the works.
Chat snuck in one final question, so we'll make this the last one. ZappyOC wants to know, is it possible to static site generate part of a website in Remix at all?
Yeah. So, I mean, technically that's possible. I don't know why you'd want to. So like, I have a couple of thoughts on this. First off, you could absolutely put Cloudflare in front of your origin server and then just say, hey, cache this thing for like basically ever. And then whenever you need to make a change, you just hit the Cloudflare API to say, hey, purge that cache. And then and then just do a GET request to your origin server to update the cache. Like that would be a GitHub action that would take like 10 seconds to run. It'd be super easy. So you could do that. That would be, and that may be a useful thing for your terms of service or your about page or so, like something that doesn't change very often. But static site generation as like anytime you make a change, you have to rebuild your site. Like a content change should not trigger a rebuild of your site. I'm sorry, that is just a silly thing that we've decided is okay. It's not okay. I can deploy a typo fix to my site in like 10 seconds with a GitHub action. I just like push and poof, it's updated. That's really nice. The other thing is that like people talk about, well, we've got incremental static regeneration stuff that Next and Gatsby are working on. In my opinion, that's a very, very complex solution to a problem we invented. And the problem with that is, yeah, sure, maybe it'll help you speed up your rebuilds of the content on the page. But what if you change something in the footer? Then you're literally rebuilding every single page. So like, sorry, I don't think that's a great strategy going forward. So you can absolutely put a bunch of cache stuff. On my site, every single page is different for every user. I am randomly picking which one of these blog posts to recommend to you based on other blog posts that you've read, the blog posts you're looking at and stuff. And so I cannot cache this and give the user experience that I want to. And so, yeah, it's amazing what you can do when you say, hey, I'm going to just dynamically generate everything for the user. And it's fast. Look, like that's pretty fast. So like I'm not super worried about HTTP caching or doing static site generation stuff. So take a step back and ask yourself, why do I care about SSG so much? Because it's amazing the world that can open up when you stop caring about that.
Cool. Well, man, this is awesome. I wanted to thank you, Kent, one last time for joining us. I learned a lot, and now I'm excited to go tinker a bit and try this
Me
out.
too.
I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it's a positive experience for you. It's my responsibility to make it a good one.
Cool stuff. Well, thanks again, Kent. And I'll remind everybody else that React Wednesdays, we do this every Wednesday. We'll be back next week, 1 o'clock Eastern time. So come join us, come hang out. We try to have a fun time. So till then, though, see everybody. Have a good one.
See ya.
Bye. Thank you.